You see your phone light up with a message from someone you care about.
Right.
And instead of replying right away, you mentally draft your response. You type it.
Yeah.
You delete it.
To backspace the whole thing.
Exactly. You adjust the punctuation so you don't sound, too eager or maybe too cold.
Yeah.
You swap out a period for an exclamation point. Then you decide, well, that feels too desperate.
So you just leave it open-ended.
Right.
Yeah.
Hit send, and then you immediately place the phone face down, feeling this strange mix of accomplishment and a sudden, quiet anxiety about how it's going to be received.
It is such an incredibly common sequence. I mean, it plays out millions of times a day.
Millions.
That specific physical moment of putting the phone face down on the table, it's a distinct bodily action.
Yeah.
It's almost like you've just walked off a stage and the curtain has dropped and you are standing there in the dark waiting to hear if the audience is going to clap or if there will just be silence.
And what is happening in that very relatable, very quiet moment? The tapping, the backspacing, the breath you hold while you wait for the little typing bubbles to appear on the other side.
The lurst wait.
Right. It's actually the meticulous crafting of the self. And it feels familiar to almost everyone listening. We all do this.
We absolutely do.
We edit, we backspace, we curate our own image in real time. And when you look closely at that behavior, there are really two honest ways to understand what is happening in that moment.
Because on one level, you really have to ask, is this careful curation simply a harmless way to manage our relationships safely?
Right. Like, is it just a tool?
Exactly. Is it just a necessary functional adaptation to modern communication, allowing us to just think before we speak?
Right. Or, on the other hand, does this constant invisible editing process fundamentally fracture who we are?
That's the darker question.
It is. Is it turning us into actors on a digital stage who are slowly but surely losing touch with our unedited, authentic selves because we never let anyone see us without the filter?
And the tension between those two readings is really where this whole phenomenon lives. And neither reading is entirely wrong, honestly.
No.
They actually run parallel to each other in our daily lives.
When we look at this through the first lens, what we might call the felt, or the relational perspective, it makes complete sense why we do this.
Yeah.
We curate our words because we deeply desire connection, but we are absolutely terrified of being misunderstood.
Oh, for sure.
Flesh and blood interactions are untidy. They are unpredictable. When you are standing in front of someone, you might stumble over your words.
Or blush.
Or say the wrong thing entirely. So we edit ourselves through our screens because we are trying to survive in a very loud, very fast world while protecting our own vulnerabilities. We want to be seen, but we desperately want to be seen safely.
And then there is the psychological, the research-driven reading.
Right.
And when you look through that lens, this isn't just a harmless communication tool. It's an intense, unceasing psychological burden.
It's exhausting.
It really is. By constantly shifting between how we feel internally and how we present ourselves externally on these screens, we are effectively splitting our consciousness.
Wow.
We are prioritizing the symbol of connection. The perfectly crafted text, the curated image, the witty reply over actual embodied presence.
If you like sitting with questions that don't resolve easily, you're in the right place. Because the sources we are looking at for this deep dive go straight into the deep end of this exact tension.
They really do.
We are looking at the sociology of how we perform our identities, the psychology of why a simple ringing phone suddenly feels terrifying to so many people, and some fascinating empirical data on what happens to our brains when we physically block out the digital world.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. So I want to start by trying to understand the architecture of this feeling. Where does this concept of being on stage in our daily lives even come from?
Well, to understand the digital stage we all live on now, we actually have to go back to a time before the internet even existed.
Okay, a history lesson.
Just a quick one. We have to look at how human beings manage their identities in the physical world. There is this brilliant framework from the 1950s by a sociologist named Erving Goffman.
Goffman, right.
Right. In 1956, he published this seminal work called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And he introduced this concept that he called dramaturgy.
Dramaturgy. That sounds like something you study in theater school,
Right.
Not sociology.
And that is the exact connection he was making. Goffman argued that life is not just loosely analogous to a theater, but that we actually functionally utilize a front stage and a backstage in our everyday social interactions.
Interesting.
Yeah, when we are interacting with others, we are essentially performers on a front stage trying to control the impression we give off.
So I'm trying to visualize this front stage in a practical sense. Like, is he just talking about the clothes we wear, or is Goffman pointing to something deeper about human behavior?
It is much deeper, though the clothes are definitely part of it. Goffman breaks the front stage down into a few distinct components. First, there is the setting.
Like the literal room you're in.
Exactly, the physical scene. So if you are a doctor, the setting is the examination room.
Right.
It's the degree on the wall, the sterile paper on the table, the stethoscope around your neck. You need the setting to convincingly perform your specific role.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then there is what he calls your personal front. This includes your appearance, which signals your social status, and your manners, which tell the audience what kind of role you're about to play.
Right, like, are you going to be aggressive,
Uh-huh.
deferential,
Yeah.
professional?
Exactly. You put on these masks to define the situation for your audience. You are actively trying to control how they perceive you so that the social interaction just goes smoothly.
Okay, let me push back on this a little bit, or at least try to ground it in a way that doesn't sound quite so dark.
Sure.
Because when you talk about wearing masks and performing, it can sound incredibly cynical.
It can.
It makes it sound like everyone is just being fake all the time, constantly manipulating each other. But let's analogize this to a restaurant waiter.
Okay, great example.
Right, so when the waiter is out on the floor, standing at your table, that's the front stage. They are polite, deferential, they are smiling, they're asking if your steak is cooked perfectly.
Right, performing the role.
They are performing the role of the hospitable server. But then they push through those swinging doors into the kitchen.
And the kitchen in this framework is the backstage.
Right, and the moment they are in the kitchen, the posture changes. They drop the front, they might vent to their colleagues about a rude customer, they might slump their shoulders, they might scarf down a piece of bread over a trash can.
We've all been there.
Right, they step completely out of character. But my question is that being fake? Or is that just normal human courtesy? I mean, I don't want my waiter venting to me about their bad day while I'm trying to order a salad. It seems like this division between front and backstage is just a highly functional way society operates. It's polite. It doesn't seem like a crisis of identity.
And that is a crucial distinction to make. Honestly, Goffman would fundamentally agree with you.
Oh, really?
Yes. The backstage is the place where the performer can relax, forgo speaking their lines, and step out of character without any fear of disrupting the performance.
Right, it's safe.
It is where you prepare for the routine, where you repair the mask. And you are entirely right. In the physical world, this is a highly functional, normal, and necessary part of being human. We all need a backstage to decompress.
So where does the problem start then?
Well, the psychological crisis doesn't come from the existence of the stage. The crisis begins when we try to apply this mid-century physical model to the modern digital world.
Because the internet changed the architecture of the restaurant.
Completely. And this is where we bring in modern sociological research, specifically the work of a researcher named Bernie Hogan, which is detailed in the OASK publisher's findings we are analyzing today.
Right, the OASK paper.
Yeah. Hogan points out that digital media fundamentally warps Goffman's model. In the digital age, that physical backstage, that safe, hidden kitchen behind the swinging doors where the waiter can just breathe, have largely disappeared into what Hogan calls a digital drafting region.
A drafting region, like the blinking cursor in the text box where I'm typing and deleting my message to my friend from the beginning of the show.
That is the perfect example of it. Hogan explains that we have shifted from what he calls synchronous performances to asynchronous exhibitions.
Okay.
And the psychological difference between those two things is massive.
Okay, we need to slow down and really chew on the difference between those terms. Synchronous performance versus asynchronous exhibition.
Yeah, let's break it down. A synchronous performance is live. It is face-to-face. You are the waiter at the table with the customer.
Right?
The interaction happens in real time. If the customer looks confused by the menu, you instantly adjust your tone and explain it. If they smile, you relax your shoulders.
You're adapting on the fly.
Exactly. You are making real-time, embodied adjustments based on the immediate physical feedback you are getting from the other person. You are co-creating the moment.
You are present.
But an asynchronous exhibition is entirely different. An exhibition is an edited, filtered, precisely timed signal that you publish to an archived feed.
Oh, wow.
It is not a live interaction. It is a curated artifact.
So the performance is no longer a fluid, messy interaction between two human beings. It becomes a static exhibit in a digital museum of me.
Yes. And that exhibit is judged by metrics like shares, comments, view counts, rather than a real-time smile or a nod of understanding.
Right.
You are putting the artifact out there and waiting for the data to tell you if you are accepted. But the most destabilizing part of this digital shift, the part that really starts to fracture our psychology, is a phenomenon called context collapse.
Context collapse. I know this feeling intimately, even if I haven't always had, the academic vocabulary for it.
Most people do.
It is that feeling of sheer panic when different parts of your life suddenly collide online.
Exactly. In Goffman's physical world, your audience is usually segmented by the physical room you are in.
Right.
When you are at work, you are performing the role of an employee for your boss. When you go home, you are performing the role of a child for your parent or a partner for your spouse. You get to change masks as you move through different physical spaces.
Because there are different rooms.
Right. But online, your audience isn't segmented. You are performing for your peers, your boss, your family, your ex-partner, and completely algorithmic strangers simultaneously. All of them are watching the exact same single stream of content.
It's like standing on a physical stage and looking out at the audience, and you realize your boss is sitting in the front row, your ex is in the second row, your deeply religious grandmother is in the third row, and 1,000 anonymous strangers with pitchforks are in the balcony.
That is exactly what it is.
And you have to tell a single joke that plays perfectly to every single one of them at the exact same time without offending anyone.
Which is cognitively impossible.
Totally impossible. So what actually happens to our behavior when we try to survive that impossible situation?
What happens is we resort to what Goffman called idealization and mystification.
Okay, what do those mean?
Well, because we are terrified of misrepresenting ourselves to one of those conflicting audiences, we present a highly idealized, sanded-down view of ourselves. We try to be universally acceptable.
Right.
And we use mystification. We actively conceal information. We hide the messy, contradictory human parts of ourselves to avoid damaging our overall image across this vast, collapsed context.
The phrase that comes to mind is running PR for your own life.
Exactly.
And what this means for the person just living their life, trying to keep up with their friends online, is that they are constantly exhausted.
Yeah,
Goffman talked about dramaturgical discipline, right?
he did.
The immense self-control required to make sure the mask doesn't slip during a performance. When your audience is everyone you've ever met, plus the entire internet, the amount of dramaturgical discipline required to maintain that front stage is staggering.
It requires a massive allocation of cognitive energy. And that exhaustion leads us directly into the psychological impacts of this shift.
Right.
When the physical backstage disappears and everything becomes a curated, asynchronous exhibition, we start to develop a very real, very profound fear of our unedited selves.
And this is where the research gets deeply personal, I think, for a lot of people listening. We are looking at Sherry Turkle's research from her book, Alone Together.
Yes.
And what she found about digital natives, people who have grown up with this technology, is fascinating and honestly a bit heartbreaking.
It really is.
She found that they consider email to be somewhat old-fashioned, which makes sense. But they are morbidly afraid of the telephone. Not the device itself, but the actual act of making or receiving a live voice call. A ringing phone induces panic.
And if we apply the framework we just built, the reason for that panic becomes crystal clear. The telephone requires a synchronous performance.
Right.
It is untidy. It is unpredictable. Turkle's subjects reported that a phone call in real time requires spontaneous performance. It is, to use the television term, live.
Live.
You can't hit backspace on a spoken sentence.
When you've spent your entire life in the drafting region, curating exhibitions, swapping out punctuation, deleting text before you send them, the idea of going live without a safety net is terrifying.
Yeah.
There is no backstage on a phone call. You can't pause the conversation for 10 minutes to figure out the cleverest possible response. Texting and posting create this wonderful illusion of spontaneity, but they actually allow for total, absolute control.
Turkle notes that we are increasingly filtering our companionship through machines, and we are nearing what she calls a robotic moment.
A robotic moment.
We're training ourselves to fear a world that is unmediated by computers. Because flesh and blood people, with their untidy impulses, their unpredictable emotional reactions, their awkward pauses, they are unreliable. They are a source of stress. The machine is safe.
I really want to pause and reflect on the empathy here, because it is so incredibly easy to read that research, to look at a teenager ignoring a phone call and judge them.
Oh, very easy.
To say, oh, these kids today, they don't know how to talk to each other, they're antisocial. But that is the wrong takeaway.
Completely wrong.
We aren't bad for wanting this control. Human beings are messy. Real, unmediated relationships are fraught with the potential for rejection, for awkwardness, for saying the wrong thing and hurting someone you love.
Right.
By mediating our communication through screens, we're just trying to find a safe harbor. We're using the digital stage to buffer ourselves from the very real pain of face-to-face vulnerability.
It is entirely a defense mechanism. It is an attempt to protect the self. But it is a defense mechanism that comes with a heavy, heavy cost to our identity over time.
What kind of cost?
Well, to understand just how deep that cost goes and how it feels from the inside, we need to shift from sociology to literature for a moment. We need to look at Patricia Lockwood's novel, No One Is Talking About This.
Oh, I love this book.
The Dialogue Social Science Review, or DSSR, did a brilliant analysis of this book specifically through the lens of identity fragmentation.
Lockwood's book is phenomenal, and it is entirely relevant here because it perfectly captures what it feels like to live inside the internet. She describes the protagonist's existence as being sharply divided between the real world, which is offline, bodily, physical, filled with grief and family, and the portal, which is her name for the internet, specifically social media.
And in the portal, the protagonist achieves massive fame. But she doesn't become famous for a great intellectual achievement or a deeply held value or a piece of profound art.
Oh.
She becomes famous for a single absurd tweet that reads, "Can a dog be twins?"
Can a dog be twins? That's it. That is her entire legacy in the portal.
That becomes her defining digital identity. The DSSR paper highlights a poignant, almost tragicomic moment where a man holds up a physical printout of that tweet and asks her, "This is your contribution to society."
Wow.
Her entire identity, all her complexity as a human being, is reduced to a meaningless, out-of-context viral moment.
What does it actually do to a person's psychology when your entire existence is distilled down to a printed-out meme?
It's devastating.
It's like having a random throwaway joke you told at a party when you were 20 become the only thing people know about you forever. It completely flattens you as a human being. You lose all your dimensions.
It flattens you and it fragments you. Sherry Turkle, returning to her research, calls this the polydispersed self.
The polydispersed self.
Yeah. The digital space, the portal, encourages us to have multiple fluid, highly polished selves across different platforms. You are one person on a professional networking site, another on a photo sharing app, another on a message board.
Right.
But this comes at the expense of a coherent, unified identity. The real identity, REO, the curated highlight reel of your exhibitions, begins to overtake the real identity.
There is a phrase in the DSSR analysis of Lockwood's book that I really struggled with. I want you to help me untangle it.
Yeah.
The paper talks about how this mediated knowledge actually starts to colonize the protagonist's brain. And there's a quote from the book where she feels like she is eating a mind.
Yeah.
That is a visceral, almost disturbing image. What does Lockwood actually mean by the platform consuming her thoughts? How does a digital space eat a human mind?
It is a terrifying metaphor, but a very accurate one for what cognitive psychologists observe. When she says she is eating a mind, she means she is fully internalizing the logic, the pacing, and the values of the platform itself.
Okay.
The internet's aesthetics, its heavy irony, its disjointed rhythm, its constant demand for engagement, these things begin to dictate how she processes offline reality. She is no longer just using the tool. The tool is providing the cognitive framework through which she experiences the physical world.
So the platform's algorithm literally becomes her internal monologue.
Exactly. There is a surreal moment in the book that illustrates this perfectly. She thinks about seeing a three-legged deer in real life. Now, historically, if a human being sees a wounded animal, a three-legged deer, The reaction is physical and emotional. You feel pity, you feel awe, you recognize the harshness of nature, you have a bodily response.
Right, you feel something.
But the protagonist realizes that her brain no longer processes it that way. Instead of processing it as a physical, real-world experience, her brain immediately processes it like an internet meme. She thinks about how it would look as an image, what the caption would be, how many retweets it would get.
Oh, wow. The boundary between the front stage and the audience has completely dissolved.
Completely.
The stage is no longer on her phone. The stage is in her head. She's curating the exhibition of the deer before she has even fully experienced the reality of the deer.
And this brings us to the tragedy of privacy in the digital age. Turkle's interviews with young people debunk a major pervasive myth. Well, older generations often look at digital natives and assume they simply don't care about privacy because they post so much of their lives online. But Turkle found that it's not that they don't care, it's that they view privacy as a lost cause.
They feel like the war is already over and they lost.
Precisely. The social obligation to be part of the network, to be in the portal, to exist in the eyes of their peers, is so overwhelmingly strong that they perform on the digital stage while constantly suppressing a low-grade chronic anxiety about who exactly is lurking in the audience.
They know the context is collapsed.
They do.
They know the boss, the mom, and the strangers are out there in the dark watching, but they have to post anyway, because if you aren't in the portal, do you even exist socially?
Right, you become a ghost.
Lockwood uses a striking behavioral metaphor for this exact loop, right? She compares people in the portal to the legendary Skinner box experiments.
Yeah, of rats hitting a button over and over to get a food pellet. We are hitting the refresh button, the like button, pulling down to refresh the feed, constantly seeking that tiny metric of engagement.
But the devastating difference that Lockwood points out, and this is the part that really stuck with me, is that in the psychological experiments, the rats actually get a pellet.
Right.
They get actual nourishment. When we hit the button in the portal, all we get is, to quote the book, to be more of a rat.
We get driven deeper into the behavioral loop without any true sustaining psychological nourishment. We get more fragmentation. We get more exhaustion.
Okay, so we've been talking about this in terms of the theoretical, the sociological, the literary frameworks. We've talked about how it feels.
Yeah.
But I want to pivot from the theoretical to the physical, because this constant performative tension, this endless cycle of impression management and context collapse, how does it actually affect our physical brains and our ability to just do our work in real time?
What happens when we unplug?
Right. What happens when we try to silence the portal?
For that, we have some fascinating empirical data. We are looking at a study published on our core regarding student programming behavior. And what makes this study so compelling is that the researchers wanted to see what happens when you physically enforce a separation from the digital stage.
Oh, no.
They wanted to measure the actual cognitive impact of silencing the portal. They looked at 22 students in a CS1 course.
CS1, meaning an introductory computer science programming course.
Right.
I want to picture this environment. These are students doing complex, cognitively demanding work. They're writing code, which requires deep focus, holding multiple variables in their head, trying to solve logical puzzles.
It is highly fragile cognitive work. And the methodology the researchers used here was incredibly rigorous.
How so?
Well, they didn't just ask the students how distracted they felt, because self-reporting is notoriously flawed. People lie, or they just don't know. Instead, they used an IDE plugin.
An ID.
An IDE is the software environment developers use to write code. This plugin tracked the students' keystrokes with millisecond resolution.
So they weren't guessing.
Not at all.
They knew exactly when a student's finger hit a key, when they paused to think, when they deleted a line of code. They had a literal digital footprint of their focus.
They had absolute proof of physical engagement, and alongside this keystroke tracking, they had the students install a custom mobile app on their phones that suppressed all notifications.
Wow.
It didn't just put the phone on silent, it intercepted them. No text messages, no social media alerts, no news flashes, nothing.
So they are tracking the exact moments the students are actively engaged in coding and comparing that data against periods where their phone is physically incapable of interrupting them.
Precisely. And to measure focus, they defined a break in the study as a pause of at least 5 minutes without any keystrokes.
5 minutes.
Right. In the context of programming, taking your hands off the keyboard for a full 5 minutes is a strong indicator of disengagement, or that your attention has been fractured by an interruption.
So the million-dollar question. What actually happened to their focus when the researchers turned off the notifications and silenced the portal?
The primary result was significant, and it's probably what most people would expect. For the majority of the students, 14 out of the 22 turning on notification suppression resulted in a massive 19% reduction in breaks.
19%.
Yeah. They achieved much longer, sustained intervals of deep work.
Okay, so problem solved. The hypothesis is confirmed. The phone is just a distraction pulling us away from reality. The portal is draining our cognitive bandwidth, and we just need to use apps to block our apps. End of story, right?
Not quite. And this is where the study gets truly profound and forces us to rethink everything we just talked about. The results were distinctly bimodal.
Bimodal meaning, if you look at a graph of the data, there isn't just one cluster of results. There are two very different peaks, two completely different reactions to the exact same experiment.
Yes. While 14 students improved significantly, for a minority of 8 students, putting their phone on Do Not Disturb actually increased their breaks and their disengagement.
Wait, really?
Yes. They did measurably worse at the physical task of coding when the notifications were suppressed.
Wait, I really need to understand the mechanism here, because intuitively that makes no sense. The room is quieter, the phone isn't buzzing. Why on earth would their focus get worse? Mechanically, what is happening in their brains?
It forces us to reconsider what the phone actually represents to the human nervous system in the digital age.
Okay.
For that minority group, the absence of notifications wasn't freeing, it was paralyzing. The researchers point to psychological factors like separation anxiety and FOMO, the fear of missing out.
More people carry both sides of this than you'd think. We crave the silence, we want to be left alone to do our work, but the absolute moment it gets too quiet, we panic that we've been excluded from the tribe.
Think about the dramaturgical model we discussed with Goffman. If your entire identity, your sense of belonging, and your social safety are tied up in your asynchronous exhibitions and the metrics they generate.
Right, the likes and comments.
Cutting off access to that feedback loop doesn't bring peace, it brings an existential panic. The notification isn't just a distraction, it is a neurological safety tether.
It's the pulse check. It's the machine telling you that you still exist in the eyes of others.
Exactly. When you remove that tether, the brain doesn't just quietly focus on the code. The brain reallocates its cognitive bandwidth to scanning for social threats.
Wow.
The silence becomes deafening. The phone, for those 8 students, is not a distraction from their work. It is an emotional regulator. Without the continuous low-level reassurance that they are still connected to the portal, they literally do not have the psychological stability to focus on the physical, offline task in front of them.
That is incredibly revealing. It shows that we aren't just dealing with a simple time management issue where a life hack or a productivity app is going to save us.
Not at all.
We are dealing with a deep, structural identity management issue. Which brings us to a really important place in this deep dive. I want to explicitly remove the shame from this conversation for anyone listening right now.
There is a tremendous amount of shame associated with our digital habits. People feel guilty for scrolling, guilty for checking their phones during a movie, guilty for caring about likes.
So much shame. But looking at this research, this isn't a puzzle with a right answer. Wanting to be plugged in, feeling that spike of anxiety when your phone is in another room, you can't hear it, that doesn't make you shallow, and it doesn't mean you are hopelessly addicted.
No, does it?
It means you are human and you are seeking connection. And on the flip side, wanting to disconnect, wanting to throw your phone in the ocean and move to the woods, that doesn't make you a Luddite who can't handle a modern world. It is a genuinely human tension. We are trying to fulfill ancient evolutionary human needs using unprecedented, overwhelming tools.
And that leads us to the final piece of research. The OASK publishes findings on adolescent identity. This research is vital because it offers a framework for how we can actually survive this tension without just throwing our phones away.
Okay, I'm listening.
The study synthesized data from nearly 20,000 adolescents, and they found something that shifts the entire paradigm of how we talk about screen time. They found that identity outcomes, whether a young person feels secure or fractured, depend more on the nature of the digital engagement than on the sheer volume of screen time.
So the conversation shouldn't just be, screen time is bad, 2 hours a day maximum.
Right.
It's about what you were doing and who you were being on that screen.
Exactly. The researchers differentiate between 2 specific types of digital performance. The first is authentic self-representation.
Authentic self-representation.
This is when your identity signals online, what you post, who you talk to, what you share, are closely aligned with your internal offline values. You are still performing, you are still exploring and testing out ideas, but it is anchored in who you actually are. And what the data shows is that this type of engagement actually builds self-concept clarity.
It functions like a diary or a sounding board. It helps you figure out who you are.
Yes. But the second type of engagement is idealized or fictionalized representation.
And that's the dangerous one.
This is when you are purely performing for the metrics. You are crafting a persona entirely divorced from your lived reality just to satisfy the algorithm or to appease that massive collapsed context of an audience. And this, the fictionalized representation, is what causes severe identity confusion, depression, and distress.
But here's the catch. The system is rigged against the authentic self, isn't it?
Oh, completely.
The cultural critique embedded in that same paper points out that platform architectures, the literal structural design of the apps, the algorithms that decide what goes viral, the likes, the shares, the retweets, they inherently reward the fictionalized self.
Yes, they do.
Curated, polished self-branding goes viral. Deep, messy, nuanced self-knowledge does not. Authenticity requires intense labor because it competes slowly against algorithmic visibility. It is much easier to be a shiny meme than a complex human online.
It is a profoundly labor-intensive process to remain human in the portal.
So how do we achieve what the paper calls coherent digital self-authorship? How do we survive this?
The research suggests we have to fundamentally change our relationship with the feedback loop. We have to start creating social comparison, the likes, the comments, the view counts, as neutral data rather than an identity condemnation.
So reframing the response. Like, oh, it's interesting that people responded to this photo more than that thought, rather than internalizing it as, if they don't like this thought, I'm intellectually worthless.
Exactly. We have to create emotional distance from the metric. The goal isn't to crystallize one single perfect digital persona and spend the rest of your life defensively protecting it.
Right.
The goal is to iteratively reinvent the self, to use the digital stage to explore and grow, while preserving a core psychological clarity and ethical alignment with who you are offline. We have to learn to segment our audiences intentionally, rather than letting the platform collapse our context entirely.
We basically have to build our own backstages, even if the apps are designed to tear them down.
We have to carve them out aggressively.
If we pull all the way back, connecting everything we've talked about today, from Goffman's waiters in the 1950s to the terror of the ringing phone to the coding students who couldn't focus in the silence, this isn't really about smartphones, is it?
No, it's not.
It's not about apps or social media algorithms or keystroke tracking software. At its core, this is fundamentally about belonging and fear.
It absolutely is. The philosopher Charles Taylor, in his extensive work Sources of the Self, provides the ultimate grounding for this entire conversation.
Okay.
Taylor argues that modern identity is inherently a process of self-authorship. Hundreds of years ago, you didn't have to author your identity. You inherited it.
Right.
You were the blacksmith's son, you lived in this village, you belonged to this church, your identity was given to you. Today, we deeply desire the autonomy to define ourselves, to write our own story. But that autonomy comes with a terrifying shadow, because since we are choosing who we are utterly terrified of being rejected by the tribe.
We want the freedom to say, this is who I am, but we are absolutely desperate for the crowd to look back at us and say, and we accept you.
And that is exactly where the vulnerability comes in. We use the digital front stage to protect ourselves from the raw, unpredictable pain of face-to-face rejection.
Yeah.
We fear being truly known in real time, with all our flaws, our pauses, our awkwardness, our mistakes, so we hone the text. We curate the image, we apply the filter, we use the technology as a shield.
We manage the impression.
The disagreement we've explored today, whether digital life is a safe haven that allows us to connect on our own terms, or a fragmenting prison that turns us into performing rats hitting a button, it is never just about technology. It's about how incredibly hard it is to be a human being trying to find a safe place to simply exist without a mask.
If this conversation felt true for you, both sides of it,
Yeah.
you're always welcome here. You can subscribe to Leone Patterns and keep sitting with us.
Yeah.
Let's just take a moment to gently summarize where we've been. If we look at our digital lives through the relational lens, we see the very real, very human desire to use the digital stage to find safe connection. We want to avoid the unpredictability of raw physical interaction because, quite frankly, it can hurt. We use these tools, the drafting region, the asynchronous messages, to protect our hearts and our vulnerabilities while still trying desperately to reach out to others.
And if we look through the psychological lens, we have to acknowledge the reality that this constant impression management takes a massive toll on our cognitive load. The context collapse, the disappearance of the physical backstage, it fractures our identity. It leaves us exhausted, endlessly managing digital exhibitions of ourselves, rather than actually living securely inside our own bodies.
And the beauty of this is that we don't have to declare a winner between those two realities. They are both true. We carry both of them every time we pick up a screen.
I keep thinking about the ultimate realization that Sherry Turkle warned about with the robotic moment. The true danger isn't just about us one day accepting robots as our companions. It's about the danger of us accepting ourselves as mediated, highly curated machines, because we have become too afraid of our own messy, unpredictable humanity.
And the realization that the next time you type out a text and delete it 3 times, adjusting the punctuation so it's just right, you aren't just sending a message. You are trying desperately to be seen exactly as you hope you are.
Yeah.
Same pace, same questions.
See you then.